In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
S praznikom! You know, in reflection on this sermon, I was I saw something very interesting yesterday. Let's put it that way. And it was an interview with a man, and I don't know his role. It was a very short clip, and he was talking with Oprah. You know, Oprah's like, you know, the ultimate figure in kind of, I don't know what you want to say, pop culture, kind of new agey, spiritual, but not religious. And she's, you know, calm and collected, and she's got it kind of put together, and she's worth, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet she's kind of down to earth and all this. And she's talking to this guy, and he mentions in the course of their conversation, he says something about Xanax, the drug Xanax. And she says, oh, yes, you know, something along the lines of, yes, people, or whatever, something, people take it to deal with the kind of loneliness of this life. And he says, indeed, yes, they do. He goes, the problem is, though, that it's linked with dementia very strongly. And you see this look come over her face. And then she's like, wait, are you serious? And he goes, oh, yeah, it's all the benzo drugs are all linked to dementia. And then they show another clip where the conversation has moved on, and somehow it kind of comes up again. And she goes, but are there studies for this? He goes, oh yeah. He's like, there's loads of studies. He's like, it's absolutely terrible. He's like, all these drugs are linked to dementia. And you see this look on her face that would seem to be indicative of a person who had used a lot of Xanax, realizing that there was a potential fallout from this. I'm also reminded, and it's quite sad actually, in fact, of the modern psychologist Jordan Peterson. He is in no way, you know, attached to our church. He's just a popular public figure. And in the midst of his wife getting diagnosed basically with cancer and potentially a death sentence, the first thing that he did was go to what? His psychologist, and then they put him on I think it was actually a different benzo drug, and to alleviate all the anxiety and difficulties that he was dealing with because of his wife. He ends up trying to get off of them, and then if you know anything about his story, he basically spent 2 years, how to go to Russia, how to go to Serbia, to get it detoxed out of his body because the addiction became so strong, the physical addiction became so strong. He said it was like 2 years of his life basically lost, basically in hell, and the physical withdrawals and everything else being terrible. I also think about the fact that probably, I don't know, maybe 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year, somebody will ask me, Father, what do you think about marijuana? What do you think about taking these THC pills and et cetera, right? And every time that somebody asks me, I'm like, well, why do you take them? And every time it's the same thing. Well, you know, I'll be anxious, my mind will be racing, I'll have the, you know, kind of an anxiety or whatever else at the end of the day. And then I take them to make all the kind of negative thoughts and feelings kind of go away, in so many words, so that I can sleep. And it's not a bad thing. I take them before I go to bed, etc. I'm also reminded of the fact that when we historically, you know, funny enough, if you see old signs for places that sold alcohol, it would often say wine and, anybody know what the next word was? Spirits. What are spirits? Well, all hard alcohol, in America at least, was historically called spirits as a reference to the fact that it was a substitute for the Holy Spirit. I say all of that not because, I'm anti-drugs or something like this. I say all this because this, I think, is man's kind of core craving in life to escape the pain, the loneliness, the banality sometimes of existence. And so man turns to the internet. We know that this is a huge vice for people. Video games, entertainment, drugs, alcohol, all of these things, what? To escape our own thoughts and feelings and to transport us to somewhere where we feel better, where we feel different. where we feel, quote unquote, more whole. But all of these things are just an illusion. Better yet, even, they're just a delusion. They're a delusion because they cover man's mind and they cut him off from God. Now, I say this because we actually see this in today's gospel with Peter. And in the gospel that we read last night, it says something along the lines of, but Peter didn't know what he was saying. What's interesting about the transfiguration is that many people think that it was Christ who was transfigured into something else, into kind of glowing white light and a revelation of his divinity. But this is not accurate. In the writings of the Holy Fathers, especially the sermon by St. Gregory Palamas, he says it wasn't that Christ was transfigured in the sense that Christ was always at all times in the fullness of his glory. It was that Christ removed the veil from the eyes of the disciples. And when he lifted the veil on the eyes of the disciples, not only did the disciples see Christ in glory, what happened with that glory? The glory permeated into the disciples. This is actually when people talk about the uncreated light, which are the energies of God that we often read about in the lives of the saints. People, it's a misunderstanding to think that the light is perceived with the eyes. It's not perceived with the eyes, it's perceived with the soul. And the light isn't something that we look on, it's actually something that we participate in. It's something that penetrates into us. It's the rays of God's divinity. And as we've been studying in our lectures for the last 3 weeks on the ecumenical councils, and last week in particular when we talked about the third ecumenical council, we spoke extensively about the union of Christ's divinity with his humanity as the firstborn Adam, because you and I are already knit together with God's divinity in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and then we will experience this in all fullness at the second coming of Christ and the final resurrection. But this indwelling, this permeating of the light of Christ is actually what we all desire and are looking for. We desire to be in this moment of Mount Tabor. This is the core, the essence of man's desire in his soul is to be on Mount Tabor with Christ, permeated by his glory and participating in his glory, to be deified by him. This is our whole understanding of salvation, not that we kind of get a ticket into heaven or that we have a theological exam that we have to pass regarding the Nicene Creed and other questions, but rather that we actually become like Christ. And becoming like Christ is participating in his glory. And so it is that we see in the example of the transfiguration who God really is, who we are actually called to become like. And we actually see in the disciples that they have this foretaste of the kingdom of heaven. It is, there is a reason why the transfiguration is actually considered kind of among the very most important of all the feasts, of all the 12 feasts in the Orthodox Church, because it's actually our vision of salvation. Our vision of salvation is that we will become like Christ, and that salvation is actually that this light permeates into us, that we become illumined like Christ, we become deified, and we have this sense of joy, bliss, this kind of losing of ourselves in a sense, and that we are really united with God. And so it is that you may ask, Father, like, when is this going to happen for me? And that's the question, you know. It's so interesting because we read in the lives of the saints, and like, obviously I'm very fond of the life of St. Joseph the Hesychast, but you see in the life of St. Joseph the Hesychast that he experienced this uncreated light on many occasions, you know. On many occasions, he was permeated by the light of Christ. And even at times, for it seems like days at a time,